Gabrielle Wang is an Australian writer and illustrator who has been writing books for over 20 years. She is one of Australia's most beloved authors and is also the Australian Children's Laureate. Her latest middle grade book is Zadie Ma and the Dog Who Chased the Moon, published by Penguin Random House. Gabrielle, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Valerie. It's lovely to be here.
I'm so excited to talk to you not only about your fantastic new book, Zadie Ma and the Dog Who Chased the Moon, but also, you've had such a storied writing career and now you're Australia's Children's Laureate. So I have so many questions for you. Let's start with the book, the latest book. Tell us, for those people who haven't got their hands on a copy yet, what is Zadie Ma and the Dog Who Chased the Moon about, and what age do you think it's ideal for?
Okay. Well, first of all, this is really a love letter to my childhood dog, Rusty. And in the front of the book, I have a picture of me with my grandfather. And when I was 9, and my grandfather, when he gave me Rusty, because I wanted a dog so much when I was a child that my grandfather knew that he found a dog at the Victoria Market. He used to have a fruit and vegetable stall at the Victoria Market, and he found this dog and he gave him to me. And so I've always wanted to write a story about him because it had an unhappy ending and an unresolved ending for me, even though it happened so long ago. And it's taken me all these years to write this book because it is about a girl, a Chinese girl who lives in Melbourne, set in 1955. So that's the year when I consider Australia to be quite innocent, because in 1956, the Olympic Games came to Australia, came to Melbourne, and in 1956, television first was broadcast in Sydney and Melbourne. And so before that, I think, Australia was quite innocent, an innocent country before it was exposed to the wider world and before the wider world knew about us. So Zadie Ma is a girl, she's a Chinese girl, parents own a milk bar. I have fond memories of milk bars, which we called lolly shops in Melbourne. And she wants a dog so much, but she has a magical power. She has a superpower. That she can write stories, short stories, and some of them can come true. And so she sets about to write a story about a poor lost dog, abandoned dog, who a girl like her finds. But the only problem is she doesn't know what stories that she writes will come true and what won't. So she can bring some into reality, but she doesn't know which ones will come into reality. So that's her big problem. And what I've done here is it's full of about 11 short stories that Zadie has written. And they're like fable-like stories. And most of them have got a little, message. And then there's also 2 sections of graphic novel, because I love graphic novels. It's the first time I've ever included a graphic novel in a book of mine. And it was an afterthought, totally. After I'd written the narrative and inserted the short stories, I thought, hey, why don't I have the graphic novel section from the point of view of the dog? So this is totally from the point of view of Jupiter, who's the dog in the story.
There are actually so many layers in this book, and I want to unpack some of them soon, but I'd love to give people some context. Oh, actually, before I move on to some context of your career, what age or ideal reader would this suit?
Middle grade, which is 8 to 12-year-olds, I would say. If they're good readers, maybe 7 to 12, because there are quite a number of, it can be read quite simplistically. Yeah, but it can also be read on different, it's got quite a lot of themes.
Yeah, definitely. Lots of layers. So just some context. You were born in Melbourne, but your first career was actually as a graphic designer, which of course why you've got such beautiful illustrations in your books, but also, what you put out there on social media, it's very evident that you have such an artistic background. When did you think, oh, I want to write?
I didn't until I had children who were in primary school. I had no idea that I could write a book. I was hopeless at writing at school. I wasn't at all academic. I wasn't interested in school. I loved art and I loved sport. I just wanted to be an artist. So there was no thought in my mind, like most authors, I would say, have wanted to be write since they're little, but not me. So it totally happened by sheer coincidence or maybe magic. And I had a dream one night, and that dream, I wrote the dream down because it was very significant. And so the next day I wrote the dream down, and as I was writing it, it grew into a short story, which I was just amazed. I was gobsmacked at myself to have written a short story, which I thought was pretty good. And then a couple of years later, that became my first book, The Garden of Empress Cassia. So many of my books are about hidden potential, and that, I believe that many of us have potential that we have not uncovered yet. And it takes something like a dream, or something like keeping your eyes open all the time, just keeping your senses open. And who knows, there might be something that you come across that will bring it about, just like it did with me. If I hadn't had that dream, I don't think I would be a writer today.
That's astounding that dream just basically changed your life. Your senses must have been open to some kind of new possibility for you to see the potential in that story. I don't know, can you cast your mind back to, were you ready for something new or something?
Well,
right.
Only it was a feeling. It wasn't anything like I want to do something new, like in a conscious sense. It was a feeling that I had probably for about 2 months or 3 months. I had a feeling that there was something big coming, and it felt like this train that was coming towards me, and it was getting closer and closer. And every night I would go to sleep, and before I went to sleep, I'd think, it's going to be a discovery. I thought I was going to discover something, nothing to do with art, nothing to do with creativity. Oh, well, of course it's creative, but, like something like a Post-it notes, I thought I'd discover something like that.
You thought you'd discover Post-it notes?
Well, wouldn't it be great? I'd be rich. Poor struggling author.
That's so funny. Okay, so that became The Garden of Empress Cassia?
Yes.
Okay, so that becomes your first book. Did you then know this is the train that I need to be on, and I'm going to dedicate my career now to being an author?
Absolutely. I knew that this was it. It was so incredible that I actually discovered that I could write, when I was, quite, I'm not going to say my age, but my children are in primary school,
Yes.
8 years old and 10 years old. And, that's a long time to discover, to have.
Sure.
Yeah.
So can you remember what your break was for that? Because you've written so many books since, and you're such an experienced author. But if you can remember back, because a lot of listeners are at the start of their journey, if you can remember back what your break was then.
Well, I always believe in education, no matter how much you know, how experienced you are, because people would say, oh, I'm an experienced author, but I can still learn heaps. And so originally I had planned to, because I loved illustrating, I wanted to write and illustrate a picture book. And it's still my dream, because I've written a picture book, but I haven't illustrated my own picture book. And so that was my goal since I had left school. So I'd always wanted to get into the publishing industry, but never known that I could actually write a novel. And so after I had that dream, that dream was in 1999. The following year, I decided to do a one subject at TAFE. and it was in writing for children. And so, and I knew it was going to involve presenting, how to present a picture book to the publisher and all that sort of thing, because I'd done it and I'd been rejected a number of times. And I thought, you know, I can get some insights by going to a class. And so luckily Hazel Edwards, who is the, some of you might know, she's really famous Australian author. Her most famous book is There's a Hippopotamus on My Roof Eating Cake. And she's just such a wonderful teacher. And so the first semester was taken up with how to write a picture book. And, you know, we critiqued each other's works and everything. And then I thought, okay, that's great. But then she said, the second semester, we're going to be writing a junior novel. And I thought, no, that's not me. I can't do that. So I decided to leave the class because I wasn't going for a degree or anything like that. And then I went home and I thought, you know, we should put challenges in front of ourselves. We should always make ourselves feel uncomfortable, do something that is different to what we normally do. And even though I was really, really scared to join that class, because I hadn't written before, and most of those students were a part of the writing and editing course, I thought, no, I'm going to put myself out there. I pulled that short story out of my bottom drawer about that I wrote after the dream. And that's what I brought to the second semester. And every week I would come to the class. So this is a really good, this is what I think is really important, is that every week it gave me incentive to work on a chapter for that book. So that, because I knew that I had to do this homework in order to present it to the class the following week. It's a really great incentive if you're trying to get better at something. So, you know, I encourage people to join classes. If you can get a writing group of people who are at the same level as you, I think that's a critique group. As long as you're kind to each other, I think that's a really, really useful thing to have. And so, okay, so what happened after that? By the end of that year, I had a junior novel called The Garden of Empress Cassia, and Hazel Edwards said, this is good enough to send to a publisher. Wow. And so she said, send it to my agent, her agent. So I sent it to the agent, got a rejection. Sent it to her publisher, because then she said, send it to my publisher. I got a rejection. Then I sent it to all these other publishers. I think I got about 6 rejections. And I've got, you know, my heart sank more and more and more. And then finally, there was one publisher I hadn't sent it to. And the reason for that was because they're the biggest. And I thought, you know, like, there's no way they'd accept me. But I thought I'd give it a go, one last chance. And so I sent it to Penguin. And it so happened that the children's publisher, Julie Watts, connected with my story. And that's the other thing, you know, other people didn't connect with my story. All you need is somebody to connect and then, you know, have that same feeling. And so from then on, that was my big break. It was Julie Watts and Hazel Edwards who.
Yes.
You know, so that's what you need. You need a mentor. If you can get a mentor, that's great. And then
persistence and
persistence.
A thick skin.
Yeah.
To keep on going after rejection.
So hard. We creative people are so thin-skinned.
All right. So a lot of people know that you're the Australian Children's Laureate, but some people don't know what that means. Now, can you tell us what that means and what you do as the Australian Children's Laureate?
Sure. Well, my husband was explaining what an Australian Children's Laureate is to a friend of ours. I overheard him on the phone, and he said, it's like the Australian of the Year, but for children's literature. And I thought, I guess, yeah, I mean, that really is because, you know, you're chosen because of your body of work. It's a nominated position. So industry professionals nominate somebody. I had no idea. And when I was asked if I would like to be, I was just, you know, I mean, I couldn't believe it because I didn't think that I was worthy. And I was very, very nervous about it. But it's this other thing about stepping up to a position where you just have to grab it when opportunity comes.
Yes.
This is what life is about, isn't it? When opportunity comes, you have to grab it. So the Australian Children's Laureate, as a laureate, I had to have a theme. My theme is imagine a story. So I talk about to kids and to adults as I travel around Australia, imagination and how important it is, not just when we're children, but as adults as well. I talk about diversity in children's literature because I think it's so important. When I was a child, there were no books where I was represented at all. And that's so important because you need to feel like you belong. I did not feel like I belonged when I was a kid. My greatest wish was to be white because I felt white inside, but I looked Chinese. And so diversity, diverse books about diverse characters written by diverse authors. That's another thing that I talk about when I go around. And I talk about audiobooks because I was not very good at reading. Still not very good at reading. I'm a very, very slow reader. So, having audiobooks is a big plus for me. So I talk about audiobooks. So I traveled to every state and territory for 2 years. So the term is for 2 years, every state and territory in Australia, which is such a wonderful thing to do. And I'm just talking about the things that I love.
Oh, well, you're such a fantastic ambassador and such a fantastic person to be in this role. You talk about, you mentioned you need to, grab opportunities when they come. And you were saying that in a lot of your books, some of a running theme is the hidden potential in people. And where does this come from? Where does this identification of, you really need to make the most of this potential inside you and make sure you take advantage or you utilize the opportunities that come your way? Where does this come from?
I think because when I was young, I was too scared to grab things that I was very shy and I never put myself out there. And so I was totally the opposite to how I am now. You just gain in confidence. And part of the reason I was shy was because I was ashamed of being Chinese. And so I was, there's racial prejudice, as you are well aware of, I'm sure, Valerie.
Mm-hmm.
And so it always pushes you down and pushes you down. And then I just wanted to totally get rid of my cultural identity, even though I couldn't get rid of the face. And so as I matured, after I left school, I did graphic design at RMIT, but I also, once I started working as a graphic designer, I also decided, to find my so-called roots and to start learning Chinese because I had no idea, I couldn't speak Chinese. And so I started to learn Chinese, and then I went to Taiwan for 5 years, went to China, lived in China for 2 years, learned basic Chinese, learned art. It all sort of started to gel then, when I found my identity, who I was. You have to find who you are because it's there.
Right. So let's talk about your Chinese heritage. Your maternal great grandfather migrated when he was 18 during the gold rush in Victoria, and he was from China. So on your mother's side, you have had generations of people living here, and your father came from Shanghai in China to Melbourne, to Melbourne, and obviously met your mother. And also as you say, many of your books have elements of Chinese mythology and philosophy and that sort of thing. So how do you determine what elements go in? Because it's such a rich culture. There are so many things to choose from. What elements, how do you choose the elements of your heritage to go into certain books?
Right. Well, my books choose the elements. I feel every book I write dictates to me what's going to go in there. I mean, I don't pre-plan. I'm a pantster, not a plotter.
Right.
And I don't plan anything. I just bounce off life. So during COVID, that was, because in Melbourne we had a long lockdown and we could only walk 5Ks from home and things like that. And so I found it very hard to write. And I was meant to be writing Zadie Ma, but I couldn't because there was nothing. I went to the same park every day and, there's nothing new happening. So I found it very difficult creatively. What was your question?
Well, how you choose the elements?
Yeah. And so I guess some of the themes that I have not, I haven't totally dealt with, like belonging, and what, like I originally my cultural heritage is China. Do I belong in China? Am I Chinese? Am I Australian? Am I Chinese Australian? And of course, as I matured, I realized I was Chinese and Australian. And so many of us have got more than one culture. And, that's something that we should celebrate because that's fantastic. And as I go around to schools, also, I mean, this sense of belonging, as I go around to schools, what I find is, which is incredible tragedy to me, is that some of the kids, Asian kids, even though they might go to school where 90% of the children there are Asian, they feel ashamed of being Asian. I mean, this is 2022.
Really?
Yes. And so I cannot, I have to write these books for these children. I have to write these books for the children who feel ashamed of being Asian or ashamed of being different. And I have to write these books for children who fit into the default white Australia, but it would be good because, only through books, fiction, it's book writing is the only form where the reader or the viewer can get inside the head of the main character. Yes. You can't do that with film. You can't do that with art, but it's with story. It's fantastic. So it's a perfect vehicle for a person who maybe has a prejudice against something, and then they're inside the head of this main character, and they can learn so much. So that's the power of story. I mean, reading is just a magical thing.
Yeah, absolutely. How does it become apparent to you that some of these kids who are in schools where 90% of the population is Asian, how does it become apparent to you that they are still ashamed of being Asian?
When we were in lockdown, I had a number of Zoom school visits, mm-hmm. And so that was a particular area in Victoria, in Melbourne, where it was a high proportion of Asian population. Demographic is very Asian, and during the break or pre-Zoom meetings, mm-hmm. The teachers told me. The teachers said, the kids, who are 90% Asian, they're all behind Black Lives Matter. That's fantastic, but as soon as it's something to do with themselves, they go, no, I don't want to know about it. And perhaps, having the COVID thing, having people calling it the Wuhan virus and all that sort of thing, right. It doesn't help. And, we had quite a number of incidents of prejudice against Asian people in Melbourne.
Yes.
Yeah. So that could exacerbate the
yes at the time as well. Yeah. You've been writing books now for 20 years, more than 20 years, so you must have a process because sometimes you might write a book in a year, sometimes you write several books or release several books in a year. So using Zadie Ma as an example, and maybe this is a little bit odd because it was during lockdown, it might not have been quite your usual process, but can you just take me through really the steps. So from the idea formation to how long you let it brew for before you start writing. You say you're a pantser. So what happens then to get the book out there, to get the words onto your computer? Can you just take me through your actual writing process?
Right. Well, as I said, each book has its own unique way of getting into it. But with I don't, unless it's a book that's been commissioned, like our Australian Girl books, and they're a set of 4 books that we needed to have published 4 in 1 year. And so I had to plot it all out, and because there was history involved and dates and all that sort of thing. So that was and I had a contract. So that was very definite. But I don't, until I've got a really good idea, I will never put it in front of I don't want a contract beforehand, because for me, that's too much pressure, because as I said, I bounce off life and nothing might happen for a whole week that will feed into my book. So with Zadie Ma, for example, the first thing I did, I had a basic idea that it was going to be about a lost dog and a little girl who wants a dog badly. The first thing I did were the short stories. And so I went down, this was pre-COVID, pre-lockdown. I would go down to my local, walk down to my local cafe. And on the way, I would think, what story am I going to write today? Because there's only a short story, so it had to be finished in that time I had my soy chai latte. And so I walked down I remember one time I left home. Just before I left home, I said to my husband, give me 2 elements so that I can write a story about them. And he said, okay, a rose and a well. And so I wrote about a rose and a well. Went to the cafe, wrote about a rose in the well. Half an hour later, I've got it all in my write it down in handwriting in my writing book. And then I came back, and then the next day, I was walking to the cafe. What am I going to write about? Looking around, looking at the little things. I think noticing little things. And as an illustrator, as an artist, I think that's a plus, because I do notice a lot of things. And so I saw a little dandelion growing through a crack in the footpath. And I thought, oh, that's a brave little dandelion, because anybody could come along and tread on it. And so I wrote about a dandelion. And so I have 15 of these stories. I used 11 of them in the book. And for some strange reason, after I'd written the narrative of Zadie's arc, I put those stories interspersed those stories into Zadie's life.
Yes.
So they fitted in pretty well into how she was feeling at that time. Like she felt like the dandelion who's, standing, he's in a crack and can't move and might have her head chopped off at any moment, because she was, she felt vulnerable. So that was quite an incredible experience, because and the other thing that I do a lot of editing. I mean, I edit the hell out of my writing because it needs it. But with the short stories, they were all fully formed. I edited maybe, a few bits of grammar.
Yes.
So it's really strange. That was a strange writing as a magical experience.
Yes.
So those fitted in. And then later on, after I'd written the whole narrative and sent it off so then I write it, put the stories in, send that draft off it's many drafts for me, but the first draft to send to the publisher, Penguin, and then they come back with a structural edit. And I'm lucky because in most of the things I still get rejections. I got a rejection from them about an idea the other day. So, it doesn't matter how experienced you are, you still get rejections. So once I send it in, then they come back a couple of months later with a structural edit. And that's when I usually go, oh my God, I can't write. They pull the whole story apart. It's devastating. It's like, you've woven this tapestry that you think is pretty perfect, and then they just go, no, just put great big rips in it and cut bits out. And so one thing that I do, which I discovered when I wrote The Beast of Hushing Wood, because I have a friend and he's really really creative in psychologically, and I ask him lots of questions. So I was writing The Beast of Hushing Wood. I had this terrible moment where I got the structural edit back, and all my books, I get to this stage where I have to tear my hair out and go, I can't write, I can't do it. How am I going to do it within the deadline that they've set me now? Because then there's a publishing date by then. And he said, well, you're visual. Why don't you take the book as it is, each chapter, and then do a little storyboard, like do a little drawing of each chapter. So then what you can do is, instead of writing on a corkboard in words, because I see things visually, do it in little illustrations and then cut them up and then rearrange the whole thing that way. And it just made sense to me to do that. And since then, that's what I've done. Although Zadie Ma and the Dog Who Chased the Moon, for once in my life, I did not get a structural edit.
Oh.
And I thought, yes. And I thought, oh no, why haven't I got a structural edit for this? Is it any good? And I was quite nervous because I had a fairly new publisher, I had a brand new editor, and I thought, is that the reason I haven't got a structural edit? But anyway, it works because it's got really good reviews. So
yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. It's beautifully written for readers. Well, actually, potential readers who to have some context, and this is no spoiler in any way. As Gabrielle mentioned, the narrative is about Zadie. It's written in third person but close focus from Zadie's point of view. But interspersed are the short stories that Gabrielle's referring to are short stories written by Zadie, and they're gorgeous. So you had to kind of have two voices, sort of, in a sense. But I love the fact
three voices, actually, because the short stories are written in a sort of a fable-like voice, like a once upon a time voice. And then I had Zadie's sort of voice, and then I had Jupiter, but Jupiter was basically graphic novel, so that was easy.
Yes, I love that. And I love that this is sort of the book that was kind of written over soy chai lattes. All right, so you do your soy chai lattes, and that's when obviously you were mentioning you were writing the little short stories written by Zadie. When you wrote the main narrative, tell me about your writing routine. Did you also do that at the soy chai lattes, or do you aim for a word count target each day? How does that get out there?
Yeah, every book is different, as I say, and let me think. Usually I start writing on a computer, and I use Scrivener.
Ah, yes.
And many of listeners will know about Scrivener, but I like it because everything's there on the screen at the same time, all your chapters, and you can move them around. It's not like Word I can't stand. And Scrivener, where you left off is where you come back into it's a wonderful platform for writing, I think. And so I start writing, and in the beginning, when I first started, and I think maybe many newcomers to writing would do the same thing, I would write, for example, with the Garden Empress Cassia, I'd write a paragraph, and then and this was first draft, I'd write a paragraph, and I'd go back, and I'd rewrite it until that paragraph I thought was perfect. And then I'd go into the second one. I mean, it took forever to write that book because of that. But I've learned along the way that, to have a shitty first draft, as some author, can't remember who said that, I said, is the way to go, and it just frees you up so much. And so that's what I do now. I just write and
Get it out there.
Get it out there, because you can't you're blocking off creative ideas.
Yes, but are you aiming for a word count in a particular week or day or month?
No, because because I'm a very I'm not a wordy person when I'm writing. So if I said I'll have to write 1,000 words a day, because some people do that.
Yes.
There's no way I could write 1,000 words a day. I would have to say, okay, I'll aim to write 300 words a day. That's my limit, because I don't know, I'm just not a wordy person. A lot of people have to write their shitty first draft and they have to cut it down a lot. Well, I don't, because I usually have to build it up a bit to make it more.
But it also sounds like you don't like the pressure. You don't want the pressure of having a word target.
That's right. I don't want the pressure. And what I do is I always write in the morning so that I'm fresh. But everybody has their own, optimum time. Some people like to write at night when it's all quiet and their kids are asleep. I like to write in the morning. Luckily, my kids were always at school when after I dropped them off, I'd come back and then I'd do my writing, and then I'd be free for the afternoon to go out with friends or whatever.
So Zadie Ma's now out there in the world. It's getting rave reviews. Are you already writing your next one?
I am. I'm working on a picture book at the moment. My picture book that I've been wanting to write for. I've got so many picture book ideas, and this time I'm doing the storyboard for the picture book, and hopefully it will be accepted. I never know whether it's going to be accepted or not. I'm also thinking, I don't think Zadie's story has finished yet. I feel that there is another part there. I'm not going to say what it is, but I really feel that there's something that's not quite complete with me, because I did a lot of crying, believe it or not, when I was writing this, because I was thinking about my childhood experience. Because I didn't say the end of that my childhood experience. So I got Rusty as a lost dog when I was 9, and 10 years later, and I loved him. He was my best friend for 10 years. I went away with friends on a holiday. My parents took him to the beach and he wandered off, and I never saw him again. And there's no closure. No matter how old I get, I didn't have closure for him. And what did he end up finding another family to love him? And that's what Zadie hopes. So I don't think I've finished with this story, or with myself in rectifying it in my
yes head. There's a bit more catharsis to come out. I think I can kind of sense that. All right. So I could honestly talk to you for hours, Gabrielle, and we must make an opportunity to do that another time. But we've probably reached the end of this episode. So I always end with for listeners who want to be in a position where you are one day, writing books over their chai lattes or whatever their chosen beverage is. What are your top 3 tips to them to get to that position?
Perseverance. And as you say, you have to have a thick skin, but no matter how many times you get rejected, or how many times you've been published, it's still bad. But just perseverance, and remember that not everybody, just like you don't like everybody else, somebody suggests a book to read and they go, oh, it's fantastic. And you go, well, everybody's got their own taste. And just like my publisher, Julie Watts, connected with my story, keep sending your work out there, edit your work the best it can possibly be, that you can possibly make it. Don't, edit it the hell out of it, put it away for 6 months even, and then bring it up again, and just keep doing that, because that's so important, because you're sending it off. This is your one chance, because you wouldn't send it off again to the same publisher. So
Mm.
that's very, and the third one would be keep your eyes open, be like an octopus with lots of feelers, getting ideas from everywhere. Always keep your mind open, never closed.
I love it. Thank you so much for your time today, Gabrielle.
My pleasure, Valerie. Thanks very much for having me.